Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about dealing with a really big bad boss. So let's get to it. So the question in question was basically, Freddie, can you talk a little bit about how do you deal with a really bad boss at work? Well, this is kind of like asking how do you deal with a bully and having your mother tell you that you should stand up to the bully or you should try to befriend him or her, depending on what type of bully you have. And it always turns out the same way. It's gonna depend. And if you make the wrong choice, you might get your ass kicked. With your boss, maybe not so much, but you might have other issues depending on how you want to deal with this. But I will say that in my experience, it usually, well, it comes down to one of two things that you can pretty much do. So you can resolve the issue with your boss, or you can learn how to coexist. These are the methods. Now, let's just back up one step first and foremost, and we need to talk a little bit about, okay, what do you mean by a bad boss? Now, I'm just going to assume here that what you're actually talking about is a person who is mean to you or a person who is causing some sort of discomfort, because the other perspective of having a bad boss is a person who makes really shitty decisions, and maybe these two coexist within this one person you're talking about, but I think that we need to make that distinction. So dealing with a boss that makes really shitty decisions is also a topic I think we should very briefly touch on. If that is the case, the only thing that you can really do there is to inform, to play the role of the expert, which is supposed to be who you are. Don't know if you are that person, but you're definitely going to have to fill that role at some point. And being the technical expert brings with it to inform those who are less experienced within your specific niche of this world, which is going to be programming and system architecture and like all of this good stuff, right? So that's something that may be very tricky for some people. I know that a lot of people feel this almost frustration, let's call it anger, when you try to inform people about bad decisions and nobody listens. And unfortunately, that is the luxury of being a manager or being a boss of some sort. You have the luxury to have the final say in many cases, depending on your leadership style. But since this is a bad manager, I just assume that this is the way that they are leading, because it's very hard to be well, you can be a bad manager as well if you allow people to derail you too much, because one of the things with being a boss is to be able to make decisions even when you don't have everybody on board, because a direction needs to be picked and you just need to start moving even if you're not going to be everybody's favorite buddy. But when it comes to someone you don't really connect with, let's call it that, that's socially acceptable, right? It's so important in my world that the first thing you try to do is to really stretch your social skills to the limit to try to find some common ground. Unfortunately, this is kind of like me being your mother again, saying to you, oh, you should just try to, you're rubber and I'm glue, or no, I'm rubber and you're glue, and like these tips that poor parents give to their kids in the schoolyard when they get beat up for their lunch money, that seems to only work in children's stories. This is kind of the tip I'm giving you right now. It can work, and I have seen it work, but it does require a very specific sort of situation, and it requires you to be I'm not saying a superhuman, but a lot of things need to click correctly in order for this to actually get any type of traction, right? So let's just, for the sake of argument, say that you're not rubber and that person is not glue, or maybe you are rubber but that person is also rubber, and the shit between you is just bouncing back and forth and you don't get to a resolution. Well, then I will tell you that this is where that word that I like to use sometimes, professionalism, comes in, because that's basically all you have left to go on. If you can't resolve the differences, then professionalism is the only thing you can do. In my experience, the best way to deal with this is to create as little contact area as humanly possible between you and the manager in question. This is also true for coworkers. I've worked with coworkers / managers in this regards before, where we couldn't really resolve our differences, and that's fine. We have a mutual respect for each other to a point, of course. Some more than others, I would like to say, but that's me being personal. And even so, we managed to do our job. And the secret to be able to do this is to have extremely well-defined borders and engagement protocols. In other words, I need to know every single detail of every single thing that this person wants me to do in order for them to be able to be happy with their current job position or the thing that they're supposed to be doing right. And I try to, the best of my abilities, to make sure that everything is in order before I do a handoff or before I have to engage or interact with this manager or this boss of whichever it is, right? And the reason why I want this to happen is because I may not necessarily be able to get this person to like me, but I can get them to not get upset about every little thing, because that's the thing, right? When you have someone in that emotional state where they're kind of pissed off, they don't really, I mean, if they're having a bad day or something like that, they're just looking for an excuse. It's kind of like going out on the streets and having some people like young men, let's just be honest here, eyeing you down in the park or something like that. They're really only waiting for you to give them a look before the shit hits the fan. It's the same sensation, like they're just waiting for something to hook into that they can start a fuss over, right? And that's exactly the situation that you want to avoid, because if nothing is out of place and everything's kind of working, at the very least, there's not going to be much to complain about, hopefully. This is as far as you can push it, because if you do this, and that's why it's so important that you really know like what your responsibility is and what their responsibility is and all that good stuff, because that way you can make sure that you do everything on your side correctly, and then they do whatever they need to do on their side. This doesn't, as I said, this requires there to be some mutual interests, and it doesn't work all the time because, hey, I mean, even if you do everything correctly, you might still have a boss that wants to chew you out for some reason. Maybe there's some sexual frustration in the workplace. Take them out to dinner, well, depending on how you feel about them, to see what happens. So what I want you to take away from this is basically that if you have a really shitty manager, two ways to look at this is either that they make really shitty decisions, and I'm sorry to say that this is not super uncommon either, and the only thing you can do there is to play the expert role. Try to inform them, try to suggest things, try to use your experience. If you're a junior, you're pretty much up shit creek, because very few managers of any seniority who are even good will take a junior all that seriously, depending on how outrageous your claim is. Sometimes it's almost rational, and then they might listen to you, but the more experience you get, the better that gets. The other side of it is to basically try to define the rules of engagement as quickly as possible and as precisely as possible, so that you can work on your side of things and they can work on their side of things. And whenever you overlap, it's the bare bone minimum. Think of it as a spy exchange between two countries. Everything needs to be just so, and they need to pass each other just so, and then you just walk off, because if you don't do that, shit's gonna hit the fan and you're gonna start shooting at each other. That's basically it. And if you still can't solve it through these means, then I don't really have anything for you. Pick another manager. You're a programmer after all, and that gives certain privileges. One which is that you can trade one shitty boss for one that is less shitty somewhere else. Hopefully. Have a great day.